We begin in Ottawa, where a shock move in the cabinet shuffle this week saw one of the top ministers take on a new role. Anita Anand was sworn in as the president of the Treasury Board.
I, Anita Anand, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
Anand held the national defense role since October 2021. She has been replaced by former Minister of Emergency Preparedness Bill Blair, a move that some critics have described as a demotion for Anand. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's new cabinet is meant to signal a renewed focus on economic priorities. Anand joins Trudeau's core economic team alongside François-Philippe Champagne as Minister of Innovation and Chrystia Freeland as Minister of Finance. Anita Anand joins me now. Minister, welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
One of the big surprises of this shuffle was that you left Defense and that you moved to Treasury Board. You've seen the commentary out there on this, calling this a demotion. How do you respond to that?
I have spent 25 years of my professional life in the area of economic policy, working as a corporate governance expert, serving on public company and private company boards, ensuring that I am teaching my students about capital markets and financial markets. And the Prime Minister asked me to be a member of his core economic team, delivering the economic message for Canadians while ensuring that public funds are spent prudently. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing as the President of the Treasury Board.
So were you comfortable with this? Did you ask for a move to an economic portfolio to get out of defense, or was this something the Prime Minister wanted for you?
I was completely honored to be the Minister of National Defence at a time when our Canadian Armed Forces are rebuilding, when we need to ensure cultural change in the Canadian Armed Forces occurs, and in order to ensure that military aid gets out the door for Ukraine, $1.5 billion worth of aid, in fact. At the same time, the Prime Minister specifically asked me to help deliver for Canadians, whether it is dental care, whether it is health care, whether it is child care. The progressive economic agenda of this government is large, and I am very pleased to be part of that economic team with Minister Freeland, with Minister Champagne, with Minister Boissonnault, in order to deliver for Canadians. Of course, ensuring that we are spending public funds wisely while delivering for Canadians is part of the mandate of Treasury Board. I've just come out of my first briefing, and I can tell you that that's exactly what I'm focused on.
So to people who say this is a demotion, that maybe you were a bit too ambitious about being the leader after Justin Trudeau, and that this was a move to put you in a less high-profile role, what do you say to them?
I'm going to continue speaking to Canadians. In fact, the Prime Minister of our country has asked me specifically to go across the country, engage with chambers of commerce, engage with Canadians, and deliver our message, which is we're going to work hard for Canadians, especially for vulnerable Canadians. We're going to make sure that we are delivering good jobs for Canadians, whether it is in the clean tech sector or otherwise, while making sure that we're spending public funds wisely and prudently. And the Prime Minister asked me to take on this very large role. There is not one policy of our government that doesn't go through Treasury Board. I will be seeing everything from a policy perspective. And yes, I'm going to have to speak with my colleagues about the need for prudent spending, and I'm looking forward to those conversations as well.
It's core to operations, Treasury Board is, but often it's behind the scenes, right? It's a machinery of government, a back end of government, not very public facing. And you don't have a lot of public profile in that job historically. So if this is truly going to be a core part of the economic team, what are your plans for the department to run it in a way that Canadians feel it and they see it being done?
Well, we have a bill in progress right now which is aimed at reducing the regulatory burden so that businesses can function more efficiently and effectively. I'm going to be making sure that we are reducing that regulatory burden for Canadians and Canadian businesses. I'm also going to make sure that we are working on digitizing government. That's crucial to making sure we are efficient and effective as a government. Coming out of the pandemic, we are refocusing the spending of our government on delivering economically for Canadians, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing.
You're talking a lot about prudent spending, more efficient government. I mean, is that a sense that these have been challenges and problems for this government up to now?
It is a sign that we are in the midst of a process, and I'm going to be shepherding the process of continually managing the public purse with Minister Freeland, of course. And we had a conversation yesterday where we will be working together side by side to ensure that we're delivering on the progressive agenda for Canadians while doing so in a prudent manner that is respectful of the fact that taxpayer dollars need to be spent wisely.
So when you look at the scope and scale and sheer size of the change that was made yesterday, is that not a signal to Canadians that the Prime Minister doesn't feel this government has done a great job on dealing with affordability concerns, on dealing with housing concerns, and dealing with some of the economic anxiety? Because if things were going great, you wouldn't need change of this magnitude.
Well, David, look at the massive files that have been on our government's agenda since the Prime Minister took office in 2015. The pandemic perhaps being the most conspicuous of those files. Coming out of the pandemic, we need to continue to ensure that we are refocused from pandemic-type spending to delivering economically for Canadians, especially vulnerable Canadians. $10 a day childcare comes to mind, dental care comes to mind, and even the grocery rebate as well. And this refocus is exemplified in the renewed cabinet that the Prime Minister announced yesterday, and I'm just so honored to be the president of the Treasury Board.
A lot of the gains Canadians have made on those things, on cheaper childcare and an increased grocery rebate and a Canada Workers benefit, blown away by higher interest rates, higher rent costs, food, month over month over month. Even though headline inflation is down, that is way up. I mean, what does this new economic team do to ease some of the pain that Canadians are feeling in those areas?
Well, let's make sure we have the picture accurate here. We have the lowest inflation in the G7 at 2.8%, and we are going to, as a government, take that into account, but make sure we're delivering for Canadians. And the grocery rebate is just one example, but we need to continue to have our eye on how we can help Canadians during this economic time. And as the president of the Treasury Board, working closely with the Minister of Finance, that's exactly what we will do. And as I said, the Prime Minister in our meeting asked me to be a member of his core economic team. And I think in part that's because he saw the experience that I have had in economic policy. 25 years as a corporate law expert, making sure that I was assisting not only my students, but also companies and organizations in better governance. That is a perfect recipe for someone at the Treasury Board.
As you move to the economic team, you leave defense at a really critical time, right? The war in Ukraine, it doesn't appear to be close to a resolution. The culture changes still need to be done in the Canadian Armed Forces. Do you have any regrets about moving out of there before those big jobs were finished?
I have the deepest of respect for the Canadian Armed Forces and the larger defense team. What I saw when I was there was incredible commitment to serving our country during forest fires, during floods, during hurricanes, as well as ensuring that we're fulfilling our obligations on the international stage, especially in terms of aid for Ukraine. Very few countries can say that they have trained almost 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers. I will miss the team at Defense deeply, but I have confidence that Minister Blair will continue to build on the foundation that I laid while I was there.
Ukraine's Defense Minister Reznikov had a congratulatory tweet, sort of warm, thanking you for the help that you've done there. Are you worried about what a change in defense, how that might be viewed by Ukraine, how that might be seen at NATO?
I've been in touch with Jens Stoltenberg this morning. We continued our conversation about the need to deliver for Ukraine. I've also been in touch with many of my counterparts to express how Canada's commitment to NATO as well as for aid to Ukraine will continue. Our defense spending is on an upward trajectory, and we will continue to make sure that we are delivering for the security and protection of our country as well as our commitment to our multilateral alliances. as well as in the Indo-Pacific. As you know, under our Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada is building its defensive presence in the Indo-Pacific. We are a Pacific country, and I know Minister Blair will work closely with Minister Joly on that file as well.
When the Prime Minister asked you to go into defense, it wasn't about Ukraine, it was about the culture, right?
Yes.
It was about fixing the capacity, the culture, the recruitment challenges inside the Canadian Armed Forces, and you set out a plan, and this is not a criticism because these things take time, it's not done. Right? And so is it good for the CAF to have a change in leadership there when you were put there for that real specific purpose as a top priority?
I will say that large-scale systemic change of the nature that I was closely involved with as Minister of Defense will take time. We are talking about eradicating sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as discrimination on any number of levels. And that is the goal of our government, not only in the Canadian Armed Forces, but across government, including in specific organizations. What I am so grateful to have had the honor to work on is laying out the roadmap for the implementation of 48 recommendations that Madame Arbour put on the table that I accepted in full. And I laid that plan before Parliament in December 2022. Minister Blair now can pick up the reins and continue to implement that plan, which includes transferring the cases from the military justice system to the civilian justice system, which includes undertaking a review of the military colleges, which includes continuing to support victims and survivors in a number of ways. And I am sure that Minister Blair will take up that charge.
But you've seen some of the concern and the criticism out there, right? The problems in the military has largely been older men in uniform overseeing a culture that has been problematic. And now you are being replaced by an older man who spent most of his career in a uniform to oversee this change. People look at this, even Catherine McKenna, former cabinet member in this government, has expressed some concern that this sends a signal about how important culture change is to this government now.
I had a conversation with Minister Blair yesterday, actually just after the swearing-in ceremony, about this very issue. And I am confident that he will continue to build on the progress that we have been making, steady progress. Systemic change of this nature is going to take time. And I know that Minister Blair is deeply committed to it. He spent his life leading large organizations, and I know that he will continue with this important work.
I'd like to just end where we started with your new role, right? I know it's day one and you've just had your first briefing. What's your first priority for Treasury Board in terms of making the difference on the economic pain people are feeling, and so that Canadians will see that this truly is going to be a department that functions a bit different under your leadership?
In an efficient and effective manner, to make sure that we are delivering on the progressive agenda that our government is delivering for Canadians, and doing so in a way that prudently manages the public purse.
Minister Anita Anand, thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much, David.